Offices overflowing with books, a James Earl Jones do-over, and getting left behind by No Child Left Behind. It turns out this beloved show did even more than just teach a generation just how fun reading could be. There are many unlikely heroes behind the conception of Reading Rainbow, most prominently Twyla Liggett, a state reading coordinator from Nebraska. After completing her doctorate at the University of Nebraska, her talent for writing grants led her to apply for a job at her local television station, Nebraska Education Television, or NETV. There was just one problem, as she confessed to Variety. I had no TV experience. I read books on how to interview and structure my resume for a job in television and got hired in project administration and development. When NETV expressed an interest in producing original programming, Liggett planted the seed that would become Reading Rainbow. Though there were already shows on the air that engaged children in reading, Liggett didn't think any of them had reached their full potential. Telling Mental Floss, "I wanted to do something to mirror what I did in the classroom, which was read to kids out loud, get kids involved in the experience of reading, and have kids talk to each other about reading." In the end, Reading Rainbow was so effective that it could have only been designed by someone in the world of education. Tony Buttino was the Director of Educational Services at Buffalo Toronto Public Media, or WNED, a PBS-affiliated television station in Buffalo, New York. He was doing research on a phenomenon commonly known as the summer slide, during which children's reading comprehension decreases due to a lack of summer education. In speaking to local educators, Buttino saw the need for a summer television series that inspired a love of reading. Buttino began airing pre-existing shows that incorporated reading, but none of them were at the level of quality he desired. WNED began exploring the possibilities of original programming, which led them to partner with Nebraska's NETV. Buttino and NETV's Twyla Liggett had similar goals for what they wanted out of their new series, and by 1989, the series became so popular that it would air outside of the summer months and even be used within classrooms during the school year. In Mental Floss's History of Reading Rainbow, show writer Len Gannick revealed that part of the show's purpose was to target urban communities and families. Though the series would be made broad enough to appeal to audiences of all backgrounds, this original approach colored the types of books and topics featured on the series. Because inner cities house more diverse populations, Twyla Liggett sought to reflect that in the series. As Liggett writes in her Reading Rainbow Guide to Children's Books, "We have a special interest in good stories featuring protagonists who represent a cross-section of cultures: African American, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American." The entire series, by extension, kept diversity at the forefront. The documentary segments often immersed viewers in specific ethnic cultures. The first season alone included episodes on Chinese mythology and the histories of indigenous tribes. Children featured on the show's review segment were often children of color. Most importantly, LeVar Burton was chosen to be the show's host because the creators sought to have a person of color as the face of the series. It's a catchy title, but Reading Rainbow has nothing to do with rainbows, so what's the story? According to Tony Buttino, the name was suggested by an intern at WNED, whose name remains unknown to this day. That said, it isn't quite that simple. Part of the title originated from the creators' interest in including alliteration, as they believed that would attract children to the series, as well as the word reading. It's possible the creators took a tip from Ride the Reading Rocket, a progenitor of Reading Rainbow that previously aired on WNED. However, it's also possible that the term rainbow came from the show's inclusive mindset. Though also used by the LGBT movement since the 1970s, the rainbow has always been a symbol of diversity and social change. By calling the show Reading Rainbow, it showed that children of all colors and creeds could come together and unite through the power of reading. Believe it or not, beloved television icon LeVar Burton was not the creator's first choice to be the host of Reading Rainbow. Before Burton, there was Jackie Torrance, a renowned storyteller who traveled the world year-round performing stories for children and their families. Once described by the LA Times as the matriarch of storytelling in America, Torrance had already amassed experience on television and would have made for a captivating host. However, because boys were statistically more likely to fall victim to the summer slide, the show's creators pivoted toward a male host. After watching an interview with Burton on television, the show's creators met the television icon at a children's television conference and pitched him the idea for Reading Rainbow. Burton, who had found success starring in the ABC miniseries Roots, experienced firsthand the power of television as a medium for change, and was raised with a love of reading instilled in him by his mother.
I thought, what a great idea. Let's use the medium of television to steer kids back in the direction of literature and the written word.
Everyone knows the iconic theme song to Reading Rainbow, composed by electronic musician Steve Horlick. A graduate of Carnegie Mellon University's avant-garde music program, Horlick had just moved to New York City and found modest success working in commercials when he was offered a chance to submit a demo for the still gestating children's series. He collaborated with lyricists Dennis Kleinman and Janet Weir, who Horlick remembered had one specific goal for the song.
We have to create a sound that as soon as they hear it, they'll just come sliding in front of the TV set, so they'll know it's Reading Rainbow.
To accomplish this, Horlick created the song's opening twinkly riff using a unique synthesizer designed by West Coast instrument designer Don Buchla. Horlick used other Buchla synthesizers and a drum machine to fill in the rest, telling music dialogue. There were a lot of kids shows on the air in those days that were all jazz-based and rhythm section-based. We came along and did something a little different. Kellogg's, the company behind cereals like Fruit Loops and Frosted Flakes, were also an early investor in Reading Rainbow, to the point that, without them, the show would never have been made. After writing a proposal to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, Twyla Liggett was only able to raise half of the series' desired budget for the first season, leaving $1.6 million left to be sponsored. Liggett struggled for months until a contact from Nebraska put her in touch with the CEO of the Kellogg's Foundation. Liggett presented the series to their board and they agreed to fund the remainder of the show's budget without even seeing a pilot. At long last, this capped the development process for the first season of Reading Rainbow, which took 18 months altogether. In its infancy, the producers of Reading Rainbow struggled to obtain rights from publishing companies so they could feature books on the series. However, as the show rose in popularity, so too did their featured books. Often labeled with the show's logo for visibility, sales of some titles skyrocketed as high as 900%. Mimi Caden, the marketing director at E.P. Dutton, told the New York Times, "Reading Rainbow is the best thing that ever happened to children's books. Books that would sell 5,000 copies on their own sell 25,000 copies if they're on Reading Rainbow." In response, publishers didn't about face. Demand was so high that Reading Rainbow would require publishers to put their books back into print if it was selected for the series, often in paperback. As writer Lynn Gannick told Mental Floss, "After the first season, we could barely fit all the books we were getting sent into the office." The documentary segments on Reading Rainbow took viewers around the globe, often to exotic locations in the natural world. Because of this, the show's production crew were often put through the ringer. One such episode was Hill of Fire, which brought audiences to Mount Kilauea, Hawaii's most active volcano. The crew filmed during a live eruption, which made for sensational footage. However, it also came with safety concerns. Much of the crew were being transported to the surface of Kilauea via helicopter. However, toward the end of the shoot, impending changes in wind speed became a flight risk. The pilot attempted to evacuate the entire crew before things got too out of control, but two of the crew members were unable to be transported back. The two wound up staying the night on Kilauea with a group of scientists studying the volcano and returned safely the next day. Many beloved celebrities took part in Reading Rainbow as guest narrators for the week's featured book, but one of the most memorable narrators was James Earl Jones, who agreed to narrate the book Bringing the Rain to Kapiti Plain for the show's first season. In the Reading Rainbow Guide to Children's Books, co-creator Twyla Liggett recounts originally recording with Jones and the incredible events that followed, writing, "He originally took a lighthearted approach to his narration. However, once he thought about it and realized what an important message both the show and the book had, he called the producer and asked to do the reading again." Not only does Jones's darker, more patient vocal work give author Verna Artema's words much more gravitas, but he had the consideration and thoughtfulness to give the Reading Rainbow audience a reading worthy of the material.
The big black cloud, all heavy with rain, that shadowed the ground on Kapiti Plain.
Every episode of Reading Rainbow was bookended by a trio of additional book reviews performed by children. But rather than cast child actors, the show featured elementary school students found via local auditions held by the show's producers. After selecting a group of students who they felt would do well on camera, the producers paired each one with a book and helped them write their own book review.
Writing that book review and then performing it, it gave me a sense of ownership.
So read Jumanji.
In the documentary Butterfly in the Sky, author Jason Reynolds, who watched the show as a child, further adds to the importance of the segment, saying, "It was saying you matter, your stories matter, your voice matters, your opinion matters." In 1986, LeVar Burton's role as host of Reading Rainbow was suddenly in jeopardy. He had landed the role of Lieutenant Geordi LaForge on Star Trek The Next Generation, which was set to become another major television hit. However, it turns out that Next Generation executive producer Rick Berman had previously worked in children's programming. He cared about it so much that he made sure Burton had availability to shoot Reading Rainbow on the weekends while shooting Next Generation during the week. The icon remained with both shows right up until the end. Burton's relationship with Star Trek producers was so strong that it fostered an episode of Reading Rainbow on the Starship Enterprise.
Hi, welcome to the Starship Enterprise from the television show Star Trek The Next Generation.
The episode took viewers through a normal day on the set of Next Generation and spotlighted the many off-camera crew members who make the show happen. When you listen to testimonies from people who worked on Reading Rainbow, it's clear that everyone loved being involved. It was a combination of both the show's remarkable impact on child literacy as well as the bonds they all made behind the scenes, with Twyla Liggett telling Variety, 80% of the production team started with the show and have stayed. People do this because they want to, and it's become like a family. The show's creative team became very close, to the point that 2 producers, Ed Wiseman and Orly Berger, eventually married and had their kids featured on the show. In addition, many of the featured celebrity narrators refused payment or would donate their fee to charity. For them, in particular Whoopi Goldberg, participating in Reading Rainbow was a privilege.
I wanted to be part of anything that furthered this conversation about education.
Goldberg was so invested that she even went on to executive produce the Reading Rainbow-focused documentary Butterfly in the Sky. Despite the show's immense popularity, Reading Rainbow consistently struggled with fundraising. Key backers like Kellogg's and the National Science Foundation proved to be inconsistent, while public broadcasting across the board continued to lose government support. This led to temporary hiatuses in production mid-season and often between seasons. At one point, LeVar Burton was so desperate that upon accepting the show's 2003 Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Children's Series, he informed the audience that he likely wouldn't appear at the ceremony next year because the show hadn't been financed for an additional season. Naturally, the show received funding shortly after. One issue was that the show never found a way to license merchandise. Unlike shows like Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow had no distinctly identifiable characters that they could plaster on lunchboxes or fashion into dolls. This put them at a severe monetary disadvantage throughout the show's entire life cycle. In 2002, President George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act, a piece of legislation designed to enhance school curriculums and better educate disadvantaged students. Part of its monetary support was put toward reading, which would seemingly include funding for Reading Rainbow. However, the act actually stripped them of funding instead.
There was no money in the budget to foster a love of reading.
Eventually, the show filmed its final episode in 2006, and after airing reruns for 3 additional years, was officially canceled in 2009, marking the end of an over 2-decade run. In response to the uproar from older fans upset at the series' cancellation, host LeVar Burton and business partner Mark Wolf began developing a Reading Rainbow mobile app entitled Skybrary in 2012. They believed that the brand could continue encouraging children to read using modern technology. In 2014, the two announced a Kickstarter campaign with a goal of $1 million. The campaign reached its goal within 11 hours and went on to far exceed it, finishing with a final total of over $5.4 million from more than 100,000 backers. It became Kickstarter's most successful campaign at the time, and it remains one of the platform's most highly funded and highly backed campaigns to this day. As a result of its overwhelming success, the app was able to be developed for multiple platforms and made available for free to classrooms around the world. In 2011, LeVar Burton went into negotiations with the original producers of Reading Rainbow, WNED, to obtain a brand license for Skybrary. It appeared they had struck a deal, but in 2017, WNED filed a strongly worded lawsuit against Burton, claiming that the app's successful Kickstarter was a breach of their initial agreement and that the license had been revoked since 2015. WNED also claimed that Burton's later efforts to maintain the Reading Rainbow brand using his name actively took bargaining power away from the company for future projects. One example was Burton's new podcast, LeVar Burton Reads, launched in 2017. The podcast was marketed as the adult answer to Reading Rainbow and even features his trademark catchphrase.
But you don't have to take my word for it.
WNED claimed Burton had no right to use the slogan as the party's brand license agreement had dissolved. Thankfully, later in 2017, WNED withdrew the lawsuit following a public outcry from fans who asserted that they ultimately couldn't separate Burton from the Reading Rainbow brand. Despite its cancellation and the lawsuit, the show's legacy remains untarnished. Though the official series has yet to see a proper revival, Reading Rainbow remains a favorite among the audiences who grew up with it.